Hey friends, thanks for joining me, Jim Baroud, to hear a few insights from leaders who represent our innovation ecosystem. Today's chat is with CJ Meenan, CEO of XP Startups and the co-founder of the National Foundation for Teaching Entrepreneurship, NFTE, and Tracey Syphax, COO at the Phax Group construction and design firm, and co-founder of Reentry Ventures. CJ, let's start with you. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jim. And hey, Tracey. CJ Meenan, I've been teaching entrepreneurship for over 30 years now. Got my start back in the South Bronx in New York City, teaching at Jane Addams High School, co-founded an organization called NFTE, the National Foundation for Teaching Entrepreneurship, with two of my buddies, Steve Mariotti and Mike Caslin. Took that organization from zero in annual revenue to 25 million. 17 years later, we went from one class in New York City to 28 states across the United States and 19 countries around the world. And so that's really where I learned how to teach entrepreneurship. I've been doing it for 30 years, taught over 5,000 people. It helped them start their businesses. And now I run a company called XP Startup Labs, and we've brought technology into the game, and we create learning platforms so that anyone, anywhere can log on and learn how to start their own business.
Fantastic. Thank you, CJ. All right, Tracey, go ahead.
Yes, thanks, James. And thank you for having me on, and thank for partner for that always spectacular intro. And you can see why I partner with CJ. He's amazing. My name is Tracey Syphax. From Asbury Park, New Jersey, home of Bruce Springsteen, Danny DeVito, Wendy Williams, and Tracey Syphax. So yeah, now the 27-year entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur. I started out as a contractor in '95. Started my first business 2 years after coming home from prison. Within 7 years, I grew that to $1 million corporation. Then just spun off and doing other businesses, real estate investments, and a lot of things in the community. So now it's spanned over close to 30 years. And I'm just so happy just to be blessed with the opportunity to do something that and dive into a skill set that I always knew I had, even as someone who has spent 17 years in the streets.
Wow. Thank you for that, both of you, for coming together. So let's circle back to you, Tracey. Talk to us about, you took us through that really quickly. There's a lot there. You've had a lot of great entrepreneurial experiences, but let's hear your personal story. I mean, I think it's really fascinating. So talk to us more about that.
Yeah. So like I said, I grew up I was born in Asbury Park, but we moved to Trenton, New Jersey when, I was like 2 or 3 years old. So I've been in Trenton most of my life. And when we got here, my mother and my father had divorced. She brought me and my brother here to live after the divorce. By the time I was 8, my only brother was tragically killed in a truck accident. He was hit by a truck on his way to school. And that kind of tore, it tore my mother apart, tore my family apart. My mother ended up uprooting me, moving to Texas. She, started using drugs. When she got to Texas, she got arrested for marijuana when we got to Texas. And at that time, being that I was in Texas with no one and no relatives or anything, I was put in foster care. So, that was my introduction at a very young age to having to be able to maneuver as a young man growing up. So coming out of that experience, I got back to Trenton. And when I got back to Trenton, I just, between the loss of my brother and that experience in Texas, I just wasn't right anymore. And just going to school, just started cutting class, hanging out, drinking, just doing all the things that, someone who's had a traumatic experience go through. So by the time I was 14 or 15 years old, I just started using drugs. Then I had to support my habits, so I had to sell drugs. So then I had to become a drug dealer. So it was just a spiral that took place over my teenage years by the time I became 18 years old. By the time I came 18, James, I had drug charges. I was been to the youth house, and I was already facing a 10-year sentence at Yarville Correctional Facility. So I went and did my first bid in 1980 when I was 18 years old. I had a 10-year sentence, ended up doing close to 18 months on that sentence. I came home in 1983. And always, like so many people that go to prison the first time, you think you can come home smarter and you can outwit the police and you've created a master plan. to come home and do it the better the next time and not get caught. Well, as you know, that never happens that way. So, of course, I came home in 83 and definitely tried to do the right thing. I got back with my girlfriend, ended up getting married in 1985, and, was working, roofing, doing the right thing. But I was also had one foot in the game. So I was doing little things on the side to make extra money. And eventually that caught up with me in 1986. I got busted for weed. And then once I got busted for weed, the parole violations hit and things like that. And I was pretty much off and back into the game again. So around 1988, I got shot and was in the hospital for the coma for 3 weeks. Bullets still lodged near my spine. So that should have been a turning point in my life, but it wasn't. I got out of the hospital, went right back to the streets. I got locked up, went back down in 89, came home in 93. And just when I came home in 93, I just made a vow to myself and my God that I wasn't going back and I was going to create a better life for myself. I felt that I had all the skills. I knew product, I knew sales, I knew marketing, I knew customers, I knew networking, I knew all those things. I just needed to change the product. So that's what I did. I got back into roofing, lucked up with somebody, worked about 2.5 years, went from laborer to foreman to supervisor in 2.5 years and quit. And like I said, I started my first company in 1995. Within 7 years, I grew it to $1 million corporation, just spin off doing all types of other work. So I've done that, like I said, for close to 30 years. But in that process, I've also been a strong advocate. I've also been a strong advocate for former incarcerated individual and incarcerated individual. Because what I realized, James, through those years, and not only just in the street, but 7 years in some of the toughest prisons in the state of New Jersey, was that some of the most talented, some of the most creative, some of the most innovative people I ever met, I met in prison. Fortune 500 CEOs, guys that have ran $1 million corporations, just had the wrong product. So I knew after, being a serial entrepreneur for 30 years, that there was a certain talent that was untapped. It was a certain talent that was lying in prisons all across this country that never ever had an opportunity to experience the entrepreneurial experience on a legitimate terms. So when me and CJ hooked up in 2016, CJ whole thing was, Tracey, this information has to get to communities that just don't get this information. And we have to be the catalysts and we have to be the ones that bring this information to urban communities. So, and prisons all across the country. So that's what we've done for the past 5 or 6 years. Like I said, I'm pretty honored and blessed to be able to work with somebody like CJ, someone who, is a graduate of Babson. He's a really smart guy. So to be able to work with him and partner with him, it's just been an amazing journey. So someone with my background, working with him, and when me and him enter a class with James, it's like magic. It's like magic because CJ gives them the academic side of business. I give them the real life experience. They get both experiences and they walk away really feeling that they believe and really believing that they can start and run their own business.
That was really, really interesting, Tracey. Thank you for sharing that. It's just remarkable what you've been through and how you've succeeded throughout those ups and downs. And that's probably an understatement. So CJ, I know you can't outdo that story. But tell us how you got started before you went to Nifty, and then sort of bring us up to date.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? In Tracey and I couldn't have two different stories, right? In terms of our pathway to finding entrepreneurship. And yet, if we had time to map it out, we could track the similarities and the points. And I think that's important because when we start to ask ourselves, what are entrepreneurs? Who are entrepreneurs? I think we're much more similar than we realize, right? And there's a lot of common threads that lead us to entrepreneurship. My path was different in the sense of I was not exposed to entrepreneurship. Tracey was exposed to entrepreneurship activity at a very young age. I was not. I was born at one of those times where people were still believing in that American myth of go to school, get good grades, you'll go to a good college, and when you come out, you'll get a good job, you'll have a nice pension, and then you can retire and do the things that you enjoy doing. And that was the pathway of life when I was coming up. My dad was a janitor. My mom was a secretary. It was all about going to school, getting good grades so you could get a good job. Nobody ever talked about business ownership in my family. So when I became a public school teacher in New York City, and Steve approached me and said, hey, why don't we start a company that helps young people learn how to start their own business, that was the first time anybody had talked to me about entrepreneurship. And true to form, I said yes within 20 minutes, ran home, told my mother, said, hey, I was 21, and told my mother, hey, I'm going to quit my job at the New York City public schools, and I'm going to go start a business with this buddy of mine. She literally froze, looked at me, and was like, what's going to happen to your pension? And I said, Mom, who cares about my pension? And she, that was, that was the most devastating thing to her, right? So that was the beginning of my entrepreneurial pathway. After that, it was 17 years at Nifty, meeting people, learning. I didn't get my education in entrepreneurship till later on. I went back and got my MBA when I was 48 years old. So it was a real life experience for me. It was learning on the job, like most entrepreneurs do, right? We figure it out on the go. And then after Babson is when I looked at it and I said, you know what? We still live in a world where information is being siloed. And I was fortunate enough to go to Babson, but what about the folks who can't punch out when they're 48 years old, who can't leave their wife and children, who can't afford to go get an MBA at this school? How are those folks going to get the information? And really, out of that conversation with my partner, Jill Callahan, that's how XP Startup Labs was founded. And our mission is to build content and create pathways and learning experiences through technology so that anyone can learn the skills necessary to be a successful entrepreneur, period. Boom.
Well, that's remarkable how much time you've been doing this, right? Yeah. How you came to it and how you've seen those trends, change. And obviously, I know when you started, and I started a long time ago too, there weren't many sort of programs at universities or otherwise.
50, there were 48 universities had formal entrepreneurship programs at that time. We're talking mid 80s. Of course, Babson was right there with the top schools, but now there's over thousands. I think there's 3,000 schools that are doing this right now. So the numbers are dramatic.
Yeah, which is a wonderful thing, right? That so many people can be exposed, young people particularly, be exposed to entrepreneurship education, so that they can have that mindset going forward. So,
and yet there's still huge segments of the market, Jim, that are left out of that learning experience. So talk about an area that needs disruption. This education industry needs more entrepreneurs in there disrupting and creating new learning experiences for folks, exactly like the experiences that you're providing.
Yeah, no doubt. So, but tell us specifically, when you started, Nifty, how things have changed, right? Obviously, we just mentioned a lot more schools, mostly colleges, but now even high schools are integrating some coursework. But so how have you seen that progress?
Yeah, I think it's changed a lot when I was in school and we first got computers in the classroom, nobody knew what to do with them. Nobody knew where to put them. So they kind of tossed them in the science room and said, here, you to the science teacher, here, science teacher, you teach this to the kids. And in many ways, entrepreneurship was the same thing. You often had a retired entrepreneur, quote unquote, retired entrepreneur. You had some formal curriculum through DECA. You had some formal curriculum through some of the other programs that were going around at the time, for young folks. But there wasn't anything systemic that was being done, specifically for entrepreneurs. So if you were going to ask me what's the biggest change, I think first is that we now have curriculum designed specifically for folks who want to be entrepreneurs. Second thing is we've created pathways for entrepreneurs and started having entrepreneurship in the career conversation as an option, right? We went from entrepreneurship wasn't being discussed at all. Go get a job. If you were an entrepreneur, it's by accident. Then we started to include entrepreneurship. Well, you could either be an employee or an entrepreneur. And now, thank goodness, we live in a world where folks know that they can still keep their day job. and still become an entrepreneur and have that side hustle, right? You don't have to quit your job anymore to be an entrepreneur. So I think we're in a much healthier place for entrepreneurs to exist in the market than we were 30 years ago. There's much more opportunity.
Yeah, no, that's a great summary. Tracey, how do you see it? Now, you saw it from an entirely different perspective as a practitioner, as an entrepreneur yourself, but I'm sure you've come into contact with education and folks teaching or trying to teach these skills. What have you seen?
Yes, it's I could tell from my perspective. So coming home, so you got to realize too, me coming home in 1993, I was coming home right out of the get tough on crime 80s. So all this prison education, prison reform, reentry programs, entrepreneurship, none of that was happening back when I came home. So over the years, past couple of decades, there's been a trend of moving away from punishment and moving more towards education. And how do we begin to integrate people back into society? So as we've made that move over the past couple of decades, education has to be the key. An educated man with a job is not out committing crime. So now that we realize that, and now that we realize that we can't afford to pay $60,000 a year to house a nonviolent offender, when we can offer him some opportunities that will hopefully keep him out of jail and keep them out of taxpayers' pockets. So we've moved into a whole different area now. And just give you a prime example, James, we did a program in Washington, D.C. For the D.C. government. D.C. Council passed a bill, passed a ordinance called from, what was it, CJ, from incarceration to incorporation.
That's it.
They passed a bill from incarceration to incorporation. And in that bill, they funded a program to teach people coming home from prison how to start and run a business. Me and CJ taught the pilot program there. So we took 15 individuals through a 12-week intense entrepreneurship program. 4 of the individuals was just fresh out, still in the halfway house. And it was a very great program. We ended up graduating 14 businesses and created 42 jobs in District 6 and District 7 in Washington, D.C., James. And real quick, 2 minutes on this story. We had a guy come into the classroom in a wheelchair. And Lorenzo, if you get a chance, Google his story, Lorenzo Stewart, Washington, D.C. Lorenzo came into the classroom in a wheelchair. Lorenzo pulled me on his side. He said, Mr. Syphax, I don't know if they discriminate against me because I have this gun charge or they discriminate against me because I'm in this wheelchair. He said, but either way, I can't get a job. And he said, this entrepreneurship program is my last opportunity. Lorenzo finished top in our class. Lorenzo used to be a party promoter. So he's in a wheelchair. He got shot when he was like 12, 13 years old. So he used to be a party promoter and people used to try him. So he carried a pistol. So that was his charge. But he was a party promoter. He was an entrepreneur. Lorenzo wrote a tight business plan on a power transit business. Lorenzo was able to get some funding, roughly about $40,000, finished top in the class. Lorenzo going on, and we interviewed Lorenzo, 2 years, right before the pandemic. We interviewed Lorenzo for our podcast, Street Startups. When we sat down to interview Lorenzo had just signed a $1.3 million contract to do transportation for DC government. Lorenzo has 7 or 8 vans, 16 employees, and a whole bunch of subcontractors. So this is over a 3-year period. So what I use that example because that is the power of entrepreneurship. That is the power of providing information to a community, as CJ said, that wouldn't normally get this information.
That's a great example. I mean, and talk to us more about that, Tracey and CJ, about those education programs that you have, introduced, and others. Give us sort of a macro view. Are there others? Have these popped up across the country? And how is talk more about your specific program. What makes it so special?
Well, it's interesting, Jim. A lot of this isn't unique. The work that Tracey and I do with returning citizens and folks who are formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated is, we didn't create that industry. But what's interesting is a lot of the folks who are involved in that from an education perspective were born out of NFTE. They came to a nifty training. They came to the teacher training program that we designed, that I actually managed at Nifty. And so you can trace a lot of the roots of these programs back to Nifty, including ours, frankly, which is wonderful. This is fabulous. And I think, when Tracey and I met, our vision, primarily Traceys, right? Look, you hear Tracey talk about this. The joy about working with Tracey is not only does he have the experience, the entrepreneurial experience, but the passion that he brings to this, right? And the belief that he lived and that he now shares with others, that entrepreneurship is transformative, right? You think about any class that we're teaching in our schools today. You could walk into an entrepreneurship class this morning and come out with tools that will help you survive and live better lives that afternoon. I don't know of any classes that can do that for you, but entrepreneurship can. So the passion that Tracey brings and he shares with folks who are coming up, that's what led us to do Reentry Ventures. And Reentry Ventures was the program that he just described for folks who've just come home from prison. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tracey, because once we got involved in that program, what we saw was no short of a full-blown education on this issue of prison justice and criminal justice here in the United States. And we knew right away that we had to transform ourselves and our business as entrepreneurs to meet the needs of the marketplace. Tracey, go ahead and share that on that.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into it, CJ, because that's there. As entrepreneurs, yes, we recognize that we had something, and it was something, as I stated before, that chemistry of having us two in a classroom together was the magic. So we end up linking up with someone I was on a panel with, who happens to be a superintendent of a prison in DC, and kind of had a conversation with them about teaching inside the prison, how we teach those that are inside the prison. And I told CJ when we talked about it, CJ, let me tell you something about these guys in the prison. This is fertile teaching ground. This is the area where we can go in, and these guys are going to have a business plan ready for you when you get there. And they're going to come to class, they're going to be prepared, they're going to study, they're going to do their homework, they got time. This is going to be a great opportunity. So we convinced them, along with our partners at APDS up in New York, to teach 1,000 inmates how to start and run a business on tablets that are used in prisons. Now across the country, a lot of states are offering tablets as an educational tool inside prisons. So using that opportunity and using that technology, we were able to create our platform, a secure platform. And I believe me and CJ, we have one of the only secure platforms across the country where we can beam securely in any prison in the country through our platform. So we've created that. We were able to do 1,000 inmates. Great stories out of that. One of the guys that was incarcerated then ended up running for councilman in District 7 while he was incarcerated, and won. So, and he's home now, doing great. So many guys, so many stories that have come out of that program. So once again, a great opportunity to combine technology, this whole issue around reform initiative to give people a second and sometimes third chances to create a better life for themselves. Because we recognize now, James, that it is more cheaper for us to educate them, to get them a job, to get them off drugs, to get them help, than it is to incarcerate them.
That's for sure. I mean, that makes so much sense. So I can't believe you educated 1,000. I didn't realize the numbers. Those numbers are extraordinary. And so why don't you comment on that, CJ, as far as, are these programs scalable? And, what would it take, right? Why shouldn't every prisoner have this as sort of required education, before they come out?
Yeah, and this really came out of a conversation, Jim, with our Chief Technology Officer, Jill Callahan. She was the driving force behind this platform. And she said, CJ, if you tell me what the specs are and what's happening, I will build it. And she literally built the first platform that could be used securely used into prisons. So we were basically beaming into the prisons using the tablets on our platform. First time it had ever been done. And so the reason this is so significant is it is scalable. These tablets are being used in prisons now just as sort of a pacifier, Jim. Here, go play some video games. Here, go download some music. And even worse than that, if we really want to pull back the curtain, folks are running up huge amounts of debt while they're in prison from downloading music and downloading video games. So it's really a double whammy in terms of putting people in debt and then also having them just sort of waste time playing video games all the time. But I'm, as you know, I do support video games and things like that, but it can't be the only thing you're doing. How could we just be using our tablets to do that, right? So that's the issue. It is scalable. It's a productive use of folks' time, and it's a great resource. Folks have tablets. Let's use them. So that was the insight that we had, and it just took off on its own.
So explain, CJ, is it totally asynchronous, or so they could do it at their own pace? And then Correct. Is there some live interaction or facilitated sessions?
The answer is both to yes. So we've run, that specific program was all asynchronous. It was all self-paced, self-taught. You just logged in and learned at your own pace. And let me tell you, as Tracey said earlier, the numbers were off the chart. People were putting in, I think, 5,000 hours. I mean, it was just insane the amount of time people were working on their businesses using the platform. And the resources on the platform, they can be adjusted and renewed on a scheduled basis. So it's not like it's just static. Folks can get additional resources through the platform. So the more you stay on, the more you can learn because we add new content. So that's a huge benefit, right? The other part of this is we've been able to develop workshops, hybrid workshops. So we just did a contract with the Juvenile Justice Department here in New Jersey, where we were teaching entrepreneurship again for the first time. There's a lot of first times for us, right? So we were working with young folks who'd been incarcerated, teaching a statewide entrepreneurship program that was being brought into every single juvenile facility here in the state of New Jersey. First time in the history of the United States that this had ever been done statewide, system-wide. So we're super proud of these trails that we've sort of been blazing. And we welcome other folks to come in and be a part of this. We really do.
That's really, it's really fascinating. And Tracey, what if you had a magic wand, what would it take? How, we always talk about motivation, right? Obviously, CJ just mentioned these people are really motivated, right? And the benefits are obviously there when they come out, right? But is there a free course for the incarcerated, for the prisoners? But sometimes there's been some studies that say, what bonus can you give when you finish? So what is it? Maybe $100 certificate or $1,000, something sort of to get them to the end, because motivation is tough for any all students, right? Keeping them focused. Now, fortunately, these this population is focused because they're very motivated, right? But invariably, motivation is a problem for all students. So what do you think would be the motivation and additional carrot for these folks to get them to finish and then leverage that knowledge?
Well, I think, as you said, I was always, and actually we just had a class we started yesterday where I offered a $300 prize for the top person in that class that we just started yesterday. And that was in honor of one of our students who actually was in our class last year. 2 years ago, right before the pandemic, we taught a live class here in Trenton, New Jersey. And when he graduated from our class, and he was actually killed on New Year's Eve. So this class right here, I offered a $300 prize to the top person that I will give them $300 deposited in their business account, not in their personal account, but in their business account, a $300 prize. So, and CJ jumped right on and doubled that. So now that prize is $600. But to answer your question, to go a little bit more deeper, James, we talk about financing. One of the most imperative ways for any entrepreneur, especially those who are formerly incarcerated, especially those who are Black and minority folks, is access to capital, proper access to capital. And until we be able to provide that for our folks we are training and giving these opportunities to, we kind of fall short. So even that area there, we've worked with partners. We got partners up in Newark at the greater Newark Enterprise who have put up seed money. So now we're able to have $15,000 in a revolving loan fund that's set up for some of our students who finish the course and present their business plan. And we're going to try to grow that. You know, I mean, we're going to try to add some folks and bring some more people in to be able to offer those funds, because what I realized, you know, even as a successful entrepreneur, I was 4 or 5 years, you know, in the business. I had $10,000 at the Bank of America in my business account, you know, and I went to Bank of America and asked them for a $2,500 line of credit. Mind you, I had $10,000 in the bank. I wanted a line of credit, so I wasn't taking it out. And they turned me down. So what I did, I took my $10,000 out of the bank. The next day, I went to a small community bank that had one branch. The president's office was right at the door. Went through, got my account set up there, started doing business there. He got to know me, I got to know him. We played golf. I fixed a leak at his mother-in-law's house. And then we ended up doing $3-4 million worth of business with that small bank. So once again, as entrepreneurs, as formerly incarcerated people, we're pretty good at crisis management and learning how to maneuver, even in pandemics and changing situations. Because I tell people all the time, James, one of the most volatile things that someone could be thrown into is a prison system. So you go in with your head on a swivel. But I survived the 2008 market crash, heavily invested in real estate. So I can tell you that what I've learned over the years is that, you know, I've become an expert in crisis management. So, you know, that skill has served me well now.
Right, right. Well, you know, speaking of all those things you've learned, you know, over the years, particularly when you were incarcerated, I mean, what is one thing, one skill that all incarcerated or formerly incarcerated people have that will help them be successful as entrepreneurs? Tracey?
Yeah, I think that main skill is the risk taker. I mean, you just don't get, you know, even when, you know, when I look on my career now, over close to 30 years as an entrepreneur, I've had a lot of failures. I've had a ton of failures. I've had a lot of successes also, but I've taken some major risks to get to where I am today. And I think that's the only way you get there. So I think one of the greatest attributes that they have and what they bring to the table is that they're risk takers. So this is a perfect opportunity for them.
Got it. CJ?
Yeah, that mental toughness, right? I have to agree with Tracey on that, the risk taker / mental toughness part of this. But one that I've experienced a lot lately, and I think it speaks to your last question, Jim, that I don't think a lot of people notice about formerly incarcerated folks is understanding of time as a resource, right? We take time for granted. Folks who've been incarcerated do not take time for granted. And we talk a lot about how you use your time and what motivates people. You know, I've had conversations with guys who are never coming home and they're taking our class. And I'm like, you know, I'm flattered, but at one point I'm saying, why? And the guy said, this is how I use my time is very important to me as a human being, right? And my self-fulfillment and my self-value. And then he came with the kicker and he said, I also talk to my son and I want him to learn what I'm learning. So we talk about this business these business skills that I'm learning about from you. I share them with him. I mean, just think about that for a minute. So anyway, I think time, I've learned a lot about the importance of time from working with folks who are formerly incarcerated.
Wow, that's powerful. Both of those comments, really powerful. I mean, I guess if we sort of extend that comment, CJ, or that reality about time, and that, you know, even if someone is in prison forever, right? Why wouldn't we potentially give them the opportunity to have a business? I mean, now everything's online, right? Why couldn't they run an e-commerce business that helps support their family outside?
Yep. There's an ethics to this, Jim, that you're touching on right now, is why don't we do that? You know, why can't we do that? Why is it crush, kill, destroy people who've made a mistake in their life? And where is the compassion here? Where is the right thing to do? I think we seriously need to re-examine that. The young man that Tracy's talking about and his partner in his business that they started from DC, Michael, I'm working with Michael, by the way, Tracy, mentoring him. Michael's back home now. Michael's back home now because they passed a law saying that he was doing 25 to 50 years in a sentence. He was not going to be coming home, and yet he still took our class. And thank goodness this law passed. His sentence was time served, and he was able to come back home, and he's immediately applying these business skills that he learned. So here's a case where nobody thought he was coming home, and now he took the class anyway, and then he was fortunate enough to find himself back home. What would have happened to him if he didn't take the class?
Right. And frankly, if we just pragmatically speaking, right, we're in the labor shortage right now. I mean, there's 2 million, I think that's the estimates, 2 million people incarcerated now. Those folks can really help the economy and society and help themselves, most importantly.
I think more important though, James, is 70 million people in America that's been touched by the criminal justice system.
70 million?
70 million people. And those are just the ones that's been caught.
Wow. That is staggering. That is staggering and sort of eye-opening. I mean, I think, just to sort of put some of this into perspective, right? I just watched a documentary on PBS about, systemic, how the incarceration system was sort of an extension of slavery after, the war, after the Civil War. And it was just super sad. I mean, and I guess, it's extended until this, that whole systemic reality and tragedy has affected so many people. I guess in some ways, it's sort of the least thing we can do, right? The government can do, not only for the pragmatic purpose of, solving a labor shortage, helping the economy, helping society, but also sort of the moral right thing to do. And when we look back, I guess this past pandemic, we spent trillions of dollars, right? The costs would be sort of minimal when you compare it to $60,000 to house a prisoner, and then the benefit to society if they're out and being productive, either working for themselves, working for another company, working for any other nonprofit organization, it's sort of very logical, right?
Oh, absolutely. When you look at even the juvenile numbers in the state of New Jersey, is $260,000 per juvenile per year. $260,000 per juvenile per year is what we pay to house a juvenile, nonviolent juvenile, sometimes a drug addicted juvenile, and that's what we are in America. In America, we criminalize everything. We criminalize mental health. The biggest mental health institutions in America right now are prisons. So we criminalize mental health. We criminalize immigration. We criminalize everything. So, but we've come to a point, and like I said, I came home in 93, right out of the gut, get tough on crime 80s. I have seen the shift though. We are really bending that arc more towards justice, toward humanity, toward a moral compass, that we feel as though we have to have some humanity for people. And, everybody makes mistakes. So to throw away somebody on the worst, for having the worst day of their life, and to throw away the key on them for the rest of their lives, it's just unheard of. And we do it to children. No other country in the world locks up more children than America. So we just have to, dig deep into that moral compass and really realize as a country, the human aspect of incarceration and the tolls that it has. Because it is just not just on the person that's incarcerated. It's the family, it's the children, it's the kids, it's the grandmother. It's the entire community that's affected.
Right. And yeah, and those numbers are staggering. It's just incredible. But there is some hope, right? Some of the laws, the war on drugs, is ending, right? Decriminalization is taking hold. So there is some hope, progress, light at the end of this tunnel.
Yeah. And to that point, Jim, what Tracey and I saw was this impact on communities and impact on families. And just as an entrepreneur when they're successful, They impact their life, they impact their family's life, and they impact their community. Well, guess what? That war on drugs impacted communities. So Tracey and I, as we started to look at this, and we said, how can we be a better part of the solution? Part of the answer that came to us was extend our program beyond incarcerated and formerly incarcerated folks and reach out to people who've been impacted by this war on drugs based on the community they live in. And so now that was really the origins of Street Startups. And that's a program designed to help communities develop entrepreneurs and build ecosystems where entrepreneurs can thrive in these communities that were targeted by the war on drugs.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense, right? And again, we're looking at the costs in the whole scheme of things. It's a fraction of the cost of imprisoning folks and the benefits, and in the scheme of a pandemic relief budget or a infrastructure or whatever, it's a small fraction that can have a great impact. I think that's pretty clear. I just hope we can have the courage and fortitude at the policy level to make some change. This has been a great conversation. We usually end with some poems or sayings or quotes, and I'd like to do that now. So let's start with you, CJ.
Great. I think my favorite saying is the entrepreneur is the artist of the economy. In the same way that a musician uses music or a painter uses paints to express themselves in the world, well, the entrepreneur uses their skills and talents in the marketplace to express themselves and really to share their gifts with society. So the entrepreneur is the artist of the economy.
I love that. I love that. Tracey?
Growth is learning to be the best when you're at your worst. And me and CJ have this conversation all the time. The ethical part of an entrepreneur is really taught and it's really brung out when he faces a crisis.
Okay, got it. Well, both of those are really thoughtful. Thank you guys for coming together. This has been a really fascinating conversation. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it, leave a review, and subscribe. See you soon.